All right, in this video we're going to be talking about the tides. I'm not sure how many of you guys have been to the ocean before, but I assume that you guys understand that there are spots on the ocean where it's considered a high tide. So this is where the water will work up during the daytime and be high, and then the tide will go out, and then it will be at a low tide. This tides are directly connected to the moon phases that we've learned about and the gravity that the moon, the sun, and where the earth is in relationship, where the moon and the sun are in relationship to the earth. And so why do the tides occur? Well, basically it is because of gravity. And so we have this ocean on earth, and it's the nature of liquids. They slip, slide past each other, and they are not as dense. And so when we get the moon and the sun pulling on them, it kind of creates a bulge, okay, of water on that side, and there's also a bulge of water on the other side. And so as the earth rotates during the daytime, when this bulge is at its highest spot, that's when it would be high tide. When it would be over here and the water is kind of slung on this direction, it would be the low tide. All right? Now, there are two high tides and two low tides that occur every single day. And so if we have a 24-hour period of time, so in 24 hours day, the time from high tide to high tide is going to be about 12 hours. I think it's 12 hours, 25 minutes to be exact. But for our class, we're just going to call it 12 hours. Okay? And the same thing for low tides. Low tides, from low tide to low tide, it's going to be about 12 hours. Okay? So what does that mean if all this stuff is super important if you're on the coast? I don't know if any of you guys have gone crabbing, or if you've gone clamming, or if you've ever been out in the ocean on some kind of a boat. The tides are really important, especially on some of the shorelines where it's really shallow, because the difference between the high and low tide can be very, very, a lot of feet on the shoreline. And so we need to be paying attention to this. So check with me on this. If it's high tide, and let's say it is 6 p.m. on a high tide, when will it be low tide? Because let's say I need to make sure that I wanted to go clamming, and I want to have a low tide because that gives me more shoreline to go and dig up clams. If it's 6 p.m. and I know it's going to be a high tide, when is it going to be a low tide? Well, they're going to be 6 hours apart, so it's going to be 12 midnight. Okay, so between high and low tide, it's going to be 6 hours. Okay, now I want you guys to pay attention to this, because it's going to there's going to be some questions that I'm going to kind of have you guys try to think through on that. Now, so I hope you guys get to high and low tide every single day. Now, there are there's 4 times really throughout the month where we get this change in high tides and low tides. Okay, and so we have these 2 types of tides that are called neap tides and spring tides. So we've learned about the phases. I'm going to erase this for now. Okay, we've learned about these different moon phases. Okay, so if the moon phase is here, again, we're just looking at sun, earth, moon here. Okay, what moon phase is that? Kind of quiz yourself. Okay, that's a first quarter moon. Okay, can you see in the way that the relationship between the sun, the earth, and the moon, they are not aligned? So this is when we have a neap tide. Okay, so we've got first quarter, and also a neap tide can occur when the moon is up here. So what moon phase is that? Quiz yourself. Okay, yeah. I hope you got it right. This is the third quarter moon. If you notice in both of these areas, the moon and the earth and the sun are not aligned, and the moon is kind of pulling with its gravity a little bit this way, but the sun is pulling this way. So that bulge that we talked about is not going to be as great. Okay? So the difference between this high tide and this low tide is not going to be very much. I'm not going to draw the waves here, but the high tide might only come up to here, and the low tide might only go down to there. All right? So what moon phases? First quarter and third quarter moons. Okay. What are the tides like? These are the lowest high tides, and these have the highest low tides. Okay. What does that mean? Again, the shore, it doesn't go up and down the shore very much, and it is because the moon is kind of canceling out. It's pulling on the water that the sun is trying to pull, and so it doesn't spread that water out as big of a bulge that we talked about. Okay? Now, there are two other times throughout the month when we get another drastic change. And so when the moon is in this phase, what phase is that? Quiz time? Okay, good job. This is new moon. And when the moon is over here, what phase is that? Sun, earth, moon. That's right. This is the full moon. Okay. Now, because the bulge happens equally on either side, can you see now that the sun and the moon are combined? Their gravities are pulling together. And so what happens, so we said that these were the neap tides. Okay. What happens during the new moon and full moon? The gravities are working together. So now we actually might see the water, if this is our shoreline, the high tide might come up here and the low tide might come down here. And so we get a much bigger distribution up and down that shoreline. Okay? So phases, this is going to be full or new moon. Okay, tides, what are these like? Okay, these have the highest high tides and the lowest low tides. So if we go back to our clamming kind of scenario, I want as much of the shoreline available so that I can dig and get as many clams as I want, so to make it worth my time. And so if I can plan my trip to the coast and I know that I'm going to have a spring tide, it's going to go way up the shore or way down, and I can time my timing where I'm going to make sure I'm out there during low tide. It's going to give me way more shoreline to be able to go and dig up those clams. So not only is this like a human thing, there's all kinds of migratory things in the ocean. Olive Ridley sea turtles, we'll watch a video on that, and you guys can kind of see that they lay their eggs, the females come up on shore and they lay their eggs at specific moon phases to time how long the eggs need to then hatch out, and the babies, so that the babies, if they dig their nest up here, the babies will not have as far down the shoreline to go to get picked off by predators and die. So it's a natural instinctive thing that they are super connected to the earth and the moon and these tides. And that's just one example. There's hundreds of examples of those kinds of things happening with the tides. So neap tides, first quarter, third quarter, they don't go up and down the shoreline very much. Lowest high tides, highest low tides. Spring tides really spring up and down the shoreline. Okay, if that helps you. Full and new moon, what are their tides like? The highest high tides and the lowest low tides. All right, there you go.